Hello once again, everyone. We're visiting today with Matt Roberts, Matt with The Ohio State University, and as many times as we get a chance to talk to Matt about really not prognosticating, but taking what the facts are today and what farmers need to do as far as marketing their grain yet to come. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, Matt. Let's talk a little bit and talk about the various crops. First with the corn crop. Where are we looking? We've had some pretty good years recently, in recent years. What does 2012 look like?
Well, 2012 looks very different than the years we've had recently. The primary difference is the last 5 years have been really driven by demand. We've seen very high prices by historical standards, but we've seen them because we've had strong and growing ethanol demand every year, and we've seen very strong increases in Chinese demand, especially for soybeans. And so when we look at 2012, we expect ethanol demand to be flat at best due to the expiration of the blender's tax credit. And when we look at China, China is trying to slow its own economy anyway to prevent it from overheating. And then when we look at all the troubles in Europe and the EU and worries about the sovereign debt crisis there, that has the potential to slow China's economy even further. So it's not clear that Chinese demand is going to strengthen dramatically in 2012 either. So the key thing that makes 2012 different and where we are now and the next 6 to 12 months different than where we've been the last 5 years, we are now in a supply-driven market. The reason we have high and variable prices is not due to strong and growing demand. It's due to the fact that we only harvested 147 bushels per acre last year when we should have harvested 162, 163 bushels per acre.
When we're discussing the corn crop, and of course ethanol has an impact there, what is the impact on ethanol when we look at, the global market and what's happening with various countries coming on board, such as Libya, other countries that might be having some internal unrest, and how of an impact does that play?
Well, when we look globally, when we talk about the ethanol market, there's two pieces. First, we have to start with the oil market. And there's a lot of downward pressure on oil prices. We see that. We just saw an OPEC meeting end yesterday in Vienna. The common theme there was increased global supply, especially from Libya and Iraq, which is very, very high-quality oil. That's putting a lot of downward pressure on global oil prices. And weak demand, weak Chinese, weak European demand, not really robust American demand either. And so that all kind of pushes oil prices weaker. That is going to be felt in gasoline prices and then also in ethanol prices, a lot of downward pressure there. But internationally on ethanol prices, we have to also recall there is a global ethanol market as well. Right now, we're the largest supplier to that market. We are actually net exporters to Brazil of ethanol. That's driven, though, primarily by the fact that Brazil has had relatively poor sugar crops, relatively poor sugar production the last 2 years. And so it's much more profitable for them to turn their sugar into refined sugar rather than ethanol. So their ethanol production is low, and that's allowed us to really come in and fill a lot of the global market. But that's unlikely to be a really long-term scenario. In another year, another 2 years, I think that market will largely disappear.
Well, the grain markets, corn, soybeans, wheat, we do an awful lot of exporting. How is that going to be impacted in the year 2012?
Likely all of our exports should rebound in 2012, driven primarily by higher availability in the United States. In 2011, exports have been very weak, but the primary reason is because we have had smaller crops. We simply have less to export, we have higher prices, and so demand's been very weak. And there's a lot of competition. Next year, if we have more normal harvest, more normal yields, we'll have more bushels, lower prices, and we're going to be more competitive on the global market. So exports will almost certainly rebound next year, but that's simply a function of price. The question is, will global demand actually increase? And that's probably going to be weaker than what we've seen over the past decade.
Of course, this is going to be a year in which we see challenges by putting together a farm bill. Where does the American grain market go as far as the challenges that they're going to be faced, pulled from this person and that person, this state and that state, when we're talking politics?
Politics are a very difficult situation right now. When we look at the evolution of the Farm Bill, there's a lot more factors and a lot more interest from outside of traditional agriculture than we've ever seen. A lot of pressure from the foodie movement, as it's known, trying to influence the direction of agricultural policy. How this plays out, I don't think anybody really knows. And obviously, when we've got the budget, pressures of the budget, pressure to reduce spending, that creates another dimension there. I think what is clear is crop insurance will probably, going forward, be the primary piece of farm policy from an economic perspective. I think one of the defining factors of this Farm Bill will be trying to expand crop insurance to more commodities, to more parts of the farm, trying to expand it to livestock, fruit and veg, some other areas like that, and see a reduction in traditional sort of support programs, the things that we've traditionally associated with Farm Bill kind of spending. Now, in all of this, obviously, we hear about SNAP, we hear about nutrition assistance. I don't expect to really see much of a change there. Most of the cuts are going to be in the commodity title.
Challenges for the environmental and how that might impact grain farmers?
Certainly. That's with increasing with an increased number of people living in rural areas that we've seen over the past 2 decades. Now that trend has slowed down some, but there are more people living in the country. There's more interaction between consumers and farmers, direct interaction. Not necessarily that consumers are involved, but they live next to. That creates more interest. So we're going to see more concern about things like whether it's this dust issue, whether it's Grand Lake St. Mary's. There's going to be more interest in environmental issues. There has been a lot of talk about now tying crop insurance subsidy, the premiums are currently subsidized, tying that into having a conservation plan like traditional farm bill or traditional farm programs already have, trying to make crop insurance look more like that. And because especially we do expect with the strong budget pressures we see in D.C., probably a lot of the conservation programs that are in the Farm Bill are also going to suffer cuts. Those are probably going to be easy to cut because they really have the smallest constituency and the least amount of political power that are going to fight for those. That's the CRP, the CSP, EQIP, these sorts of programs probably will suffer. So trying to find some other way to tie environmental quality into agricultural policy is probably going to find a lot of support.
Matt, in the time that we have left, the price outlook for 2012, I know that's sort of like asking you to stick out your neck, but where do you see that for the major commodities?
When we start with corn, I think the primary thing I want to say is I'm not going to sit and predict price, but what I will say is there is a significant possibility, one that I think farmers are not taking seriously enough, that when we go to harvest this fall, so fall of 2012, we could be seeing cash prices of $375, $385. There is a scenario that's really easy to get to that we see prices $1 or more lower than where they are now. We could see a significant decline in prices, and that's based upon 94 million acres planted. That's the market's talking about, and that's based on trend line yields. And we could still see significantly weaker prices, and that's driven by the fact we are not in a demand-driven market. We're in a supply-driven market. For that reason, market like it, historically, the year after you've had a significant yield reduction, prices go lower. This time of year, prices stay high, trying to bid those acres in. Once those acres are bid in, there's no reason to keep prices high past sort of March, April. So I think we're setting up for very weak pricing, especially in corn. I think soybeans, there's a little less downside risk. Most of those acres, or a good portion of those acres, will come out of soybeans. Globally, I think soybean demand is more robust than corn demand right now. So I don't think there's as much downside. When I look, though, at corn, I think that marketing both old and new crop should be aggressive. I think we need to stay aggressive with those decisions.
Matt, if folks would like to ask you some more questions or get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Best way to do that is either email. I'm roberts.628@osu.edu. I'm also on Twitter pretty often. My handle on Twitter is @YourEconProf. I'm out there. I converse with a lot of people. There's a lot of traders that are out there talking about where these markets are going and how they're behaving.
Matt Roberts of The Ohio State University has been our guest. Always a pleasure. Thanks for being with us, Matt.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
And we'll be back right after this.